The Love Your Podcast is a combination of humor, science, and real-world experience to help you break the battles with food, exercise, mindset, and your body. From head to toe, inside and out, this podcast has you covered. I'm your host and founder of the Fit Mom Revolution, Julie Stubblefield. Welcome. Hello, Love Your Podcast listeners. Welcome back this week, and thank you for giving me a little space in your ear. We are still talking about compassion because it is such a topic worthy of reviewing, worthy of spending a little time on, and worthy of your attention. And you are worth having compassion. So I'm working on helping you create a path for that in your life. And we're breaking it down into smaller bite-sized pieces to make it a little easier to work on and a little easier to attain. So if you have just discovered Love Your Podcast, welcome. And if you've been hopping around from episode to episode, I'm going to encourage both types of listeners to make sure you start with this compassion series with episode 74 and work your way through in chronological order, because each episode is building on the last. And if you listen to them out of order, it's not going to make a lot of sense. So before we get into this week's lesson, I just want to spend a little bit of time recapping just a small amount to bring you up to speed, since there is a week in between each episode and you might have a few cobwebs in your brain, which is totally normal. So we talked about why we can't just go from, loving or strongly disliking our body and maybe even our lives to complete and total adoration. And that compassion is actually the genesis of making these changes. And we looked at what it's not, that the wellness industry is actually very sick, and how to remove pieces of lack of compassion from your life to make more room for the compassion. And then we talked about identifying what it is and finding it, looking for it being extended to others, looking for it being extended to you, and what it's like to witness and then to participate in compassion. So all of that is important because I have a little exercise for you this week. And if you are uncomfortable with this, congratulations, you're human and you're normal, whatever normal is, whatever that definition is. That's a whole nother episode in itself, right? These types of things are a little uncomfortable because we're not used to, first of all, thinking about larger concepts and bite-sized pieces, but additionally because you're not used to thinking about yourself in this way. And that's okay. That's why you're here. That's why this podcast exists. And that's why we're having this dialogue, this conversation. And I want you to be patient with yourself. And I want you to spend a little bit of time on some of these exercises. And if they're a little uncomfortable, take a breather. Come back to them. The more that you practice this, just like the more you practice treating your body well with food and exercise, the better you get. The easier it becomes, the less of a hiccup that happens along the way. So I want you to think about where you've considered compassion so far. So over the last week, you should have been spending some time with observing compassion and where you see it being extended to others. And maybe you see it extending to others and participating in that compassion process, or maybe you have felt it extended to you. So now that you are reminded that compassion actually does exist in your everyday life and you have that radar up for it, I want you to think about what would compassion look like if someone deliberately extended it to you. And it doesn't have to be about your body, because that's actually a very small part of your life, right? You have experiences, you have relationships, you have a whole world outside of what your body looks like. So I want you to think about what does compassion look like if someone were extending it to you? What would they say? Would they say things like, gosh, I know you had a really hard time for a few years, and it's making it maybe harder for you to get things done now. It's okay. Would they say to you, I see that you're so hard on yourself, and I know it's because of maybe your upbringing, and I want you to know that it's okay and I'm here for you. Maybe someone's seeing you just have a rough day and saying, hey, you look like you could use a friend. How can I help? Compassion can take a lot of different forms. There's no one right way to show compassion, and it can be received in many ways in our lives. What would it look like if someone extended you compassion? What would they say? What would they forgive? Would they help you forgive some past mistakes? Would they forgive you for maybe some things that you have said or done? Would they forgive a current point of friction in your relationship? Would they forgive you for mistakes that don't even impact them? So what would they say? What would they forgive? What would they acknowledge? Would they acknowledge some of the hardships that you've had? Would they acknowledge some of the obstacles that you faced? Would they acknowledge the hard time that you're having right now in any part of your life? So if someone were extending compassion to you, what would they say? What would they forgive? What would they acknowledge? And then finally, what would they relieve? If someone were extending compassion to you, would they try to relieve you of some grief, of some sorrow, of some pain, frustration, stress, overwhelm? What would compassion from someone else relieve for you? So let's just go through those again. What would compassion look like if someone were to extend it to you? What would they say? What would they forgive? What would they acknowledge? And what would they relieve? You may have some really easy answers to some of these, and others may take a while. You may not have any kind of answer right away, and that's okay. Remember, if all of this were super easy for you, you'd already be doing it, right? And self-compassion would be super easy, and recognizing it in others would be a piece of cake. But that's not the case. Take some time. Try them when you feel ready. Revisit them when you want to. We are building a new thought pattern and a new experience for you together. Have patience. Next week, we're going to be bringing this all full circle. Not necessarily wrapping up our discussion on compassion, but we're connecting the dots and really bringing in a full look at what we're doing. I will talk to you then.